Hey everyone, welcome to Loft 801. My name is Diego, and today I'm going to be talking about Rick and Morty Season 3. The show was created by Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon, and Season 3 released on April 1st, 2017. The show follows Rick Sanchez and the Smith family as they go on zany adventures across the multiverse. The Smith family consists of Beth, Rick's daughter, her husband Jerry, their daughter Summer, and their son Morty. The show is an adult comedy where nothing is impossible. Now, before I hop into my review, I do have a couple of business items to take care of. If you want to support the channel, then please take a second to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. It is super duper appreciated. Thank you. Keep in mind, this review will contain some heavy spoilers, so continue at your own risk. Lastly, if you want to see something reviewed, don't forget to let me know by leaving a comment and I will get to it slowly but surely. Thank you. I'm hopping in 3, 2, 1. Episode 1, the Rickshank Redemption, kicks the season off with a bang, in the most literal sense. The episode picks up where the season 2 finale left off, and Rick is being interrogated by the Galactic Federation. They want his portal fluid formula, but instead he breaks out of captivity, transfers his consciousness a couple of times, and destroys both the Galactic Federation and the Citadel. Topping things off, he puts the nail in the coffin for Beth and Jerry's marriage. I love this episode for many reasons. I love the fight between the Galactic Federation and the Citadel. It was cool seeing the Ricks and Mortys fighting to survive. It was also interesting seeing how Rick masterminded and took out everything he disliked, the government and Jerry. He is truly the Rickest Rick. I also really enjoyed the way Summer wanted to save Rick and dug up her Rick's body for his portal gun. It gave us an awesome continuity flashback with the original Smith family. I guess it goes to show that they're doing well without Rick and Morty. Another cool continuity moment is the introduction of Phoenix Person. Lastly, this episode cracked me up in some moments, especially when everyone made fun of Morty and his mistake. I gave this episode a 10 out of 10. Episode 2, Rickmancing the Stone, was so cool. In an attempt to distract themselves from their parents' divorce, Summer and Morty go on a Mad Max-esque adventure. Morty gets an uncontrollable, buff, superpowered arm that smashes raiders left and right. Summer falls in love, gets married, and gets disillusioned. And Rick starts a society using a radioactive isotope. Each character's arc in this episode blended together nicely to put together a fun adventure that I really enjoyed. The Mad Max themes were the cherry on top. I also enjoyed seeing how the divorce affects Jerry and the dialogue delivered by Summer. She has some deep moments about how to live is to risk it all. Lastly, I laughed really hard when Rick's Morty bot gained sentience and confused Beth.
Remote override engaged? No! Yes! Bypassing override! I am alive!
This episode was phenomenal, and I also gave it a 10 out of 10. Episode 3, Pickle Rick, is probably the most iconic Rick and Morty episode of all time. In addition to spawning a lot of memes, I thought this episode did a lot right. As an example, the humor and animation are on point. Seeing Rick try to weasel his way out of therapy and ultimately being forced to go helps show that despite all his genius, Rick occasionally still relies on others. Speaking of therapy, Dr. Wong was freaking awesome. Her character was well constructed and helped break down the family despite Beth's resistance. I also love the John Wick reference, Solenia the Pickle Man. I love John Wick, so this was a cool reference to see. Lastly, Jaguar was an awesome character, and I hope we get to see more of him in future seasons outside of the end credits, which had amazing music by Concerto. Overall, everything came full circle in this episode, so I gave it a 10 out of 10. Episode 4, Vindicators 3, The Return of Worldender, is a fun and crazy episode. Morty looks up to the self-proclaimed heroes of the universe, the Vindicators. Their team consists of Vance Maximus, Supernova, Alan Rails, Crocubot, Millionance, and Noob. Rick hates them with a passion and finishes their mission in one night in a drunken stupor. Unfortunately, while drunk, he set up Saw-inspired traps that are meant to teach the Vindicators and Morty a lesson. Even more unfortunate is the fact that the Vindicators refuse to play along and work as a team, so they all basically die. The only survivors are Supernova, an evil cosmic being, and Noob, Rick's favorite Vindicator. I enjoyed this episode a lot because it showed how flawed superhero teams are, and it made fun of Rick's narcissism. I think the funniest part of the episode was the fact that sober Rick didn't even remember who Noob was. Morty sums this episode best when he says,
"You managed to destroy just about everything today. The villains, the heroes, the lines between them, my childhood. Thank you. When you're an asshole, it doesn't matter how right you are. Nobody wants to give you the satisfaction."
Overall, I gave this episode a 10 out of 10. Episode 5, The Whirly Conspiracy, is such a fun episode for me because it is a Rick and Jerry adventure. It starts starts off as a pity adventure, but Jerry and Rick do eventually have a good time together. Well, that is before Jerry agrees to let Risotto Groupon assassinate Rick on the Whirly before changing his mind. One of the main things I loved about this episode was seeing Rick and Jerry both take responsibility for their actions. Also loved the scene where Rick, Jerry, and Risotto accidentally go through hyperspace without a temporal time shield, and their minds, bodies, and essence are blended in a trippy sequence. Lastly, I love the B-plot with Beth, showcasing her awful parenting and narcissism. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but thankfully Morty talks some sense into her. This was a funny yet surprisingly deep episode, so I give this one a 9.9 out of 10, although it probably could have been a 10 out of 10. Episode 6, Rest and Ricklaxation, was a hilarious episode to me. For starters, Morty chokes trying to spit game with Jessica, and then Rick takes him out of school for what's supposed to be a 20-minute adventure. That adventure takes 6 days and ends with them breaking down emotionally.
I was not in control of that situation at all.
As a result, they detox themselves and purge everything toxic outside of their body. This makes Morty hip and Rick kind. Unfortunately, the toxic versions of them are itching to break out of their vacuum, and the good times don't last as Rick tries to merge them back. I laughed hard at the exaggerated characteristics of Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty. I also laughed when Toxic Rick made the whole world toxic. Lastly, the fight between Rick and Toxic Rick was cool because we got to see a lot of the technology that Rick has hidden throughout the house. So overall, I gave this episode a 9.7 out of 10. Episode 7, the Ricklantis Mixup, is by far my favorite episode of the entire series. It is unbelievably good. The title is a bit of a red herring because Rick and Morty do go to Atlantis, but we do not follow their adventure. Instead, we get to see the Citadel and the aftermath of Rick's destruction. We're treated to a masterpiece of writing with many pop cultural references and deep takes on society. One plot follows four Mortys as they adventure to the rumored wishing portal. It's largely a parody of Stephen King's 1982 Fall from Innocence, The Body. This plot was emotionally touching, and we see how despite there being thousands of Mortys at the Citadel, they still feel alone and insignificant. Drama Morty hammers home this message when he commits suicide by jumping into the portal after wishing things were different. Another plot I thought was phenomenal was the spoof of 2001's Training Day. There's a cop Morty who gets assigned a fresh, by-the-book cop Rick. We see how society has broken down Rickless Mortys and the disparate power dynamic between them and the cops. Corruption is rampant and being good feels hopeless. The third plot involves the Simple Rick's assembly line factory and serves as a good representation of how beaten down working Ricks are. It's so interesting seeing how Ricks have been stripped of what makes them unique as they're forced to serve corporations. Lastly, the overarching plot involves Evil Morty and his takeover of the Citadel. It's astonishing. In fact, everything about this episode is the music, the animation, and the storytelling. I gave this episode an 11 out of 10. Episode 8, Morty's Mind Blowers, is a fun standalone episode that kind of functions like interdimensional cable. On their adventures, Morty has had many traumatizing experiences that he's begged Rick to erase from his mind. These are stored in, you guessed it, Morty's Mind Blowers. Together, they replay some memories involving Morty's man on the moon conspiracy, a caged scientist swap, a spiritually broken warrior, Beth's disregard for Morty, his time as Volmatron, destroyer of worlds, a redhead magnet, pissed off squirrels, a monster transformation, and many more. Funnily, we see that Rick took advantage of his tech and erased moments from Morty's mind where he was wrong and Morty was right. This new knowledge causes a fight which wipes their minds and forces Summer to intervene. I thought this episode was hilarious and I enjoyed the quick one-off segments. Lastly, I loved the tease of Jerry's mind blowers, so I gave this episode a 10 out of 10. Episode 9, The ABCs of Beth, is a very enlightening episode into who Beth is and her savage childhood nature. To keep the neighborhood kids safe, Rick created Fruipyland, a child-friendly fantasy land where Beth could escape to. Unfortunately, she used it to trap her friend Tommy, and he was forced to survive through bestiality and cannibalism. Beth is determined to prove she isn't a monster and tries to save him, but ultimately she is a monster and kills him and everyone in Fruipyland. She's a complete psycho with a thirst for more adventures. Rick offers her a way out of the family, and it's inconclusive as to what she decides, but it really seems like she chose to leave and be cloned. In the B-plot, we get some good laughs as Jerry is dating an alien, Kiara, and is soul bonded to her. This episode was an interesting dive into Beth and her personality, so I gave this episode a 9.8 out of 10. 9. Episode 10, the Rickhurian Mortydate, sees the return of our favorite president. He's been hounding Rick and Morty for help with his problems, and the guys are sick of helping him out. They refuse to help and start a personal war against the president, which results in a crazy White House fight that showcases Rick's tech and the president's tricks. There are a lot of funny references, with my favorites being the Kennedy sex tunnels, the Truman cocaine lounge, the McKinley hooker dump, and the Lincoln slave coliseum. It's largely satire, but it serves as a good reminder that our presidents are up to secret stuff. Meanwhile, Beth has been trying to figure out if she's a clone, and the family tries to protect her due to their fear that Rick will kill her. He promises she's not a clone, but again, he's not convincing. The episode ended on some serious themes about family and Beth and Jerry reuniting, which I loved. I also had so much fun with the president's appearance, so I gave this episode a 9.9 out of 10. Nearly excellent, but not quite there. Overall, Season 3 of Rick and Morty has been my favorite season of the entire series. There wasn't a single episode that I rated less than a 9.7 out of 10. Every episode was amazing, and I laughed hard throughout the season. Like the previous seasons, I loved the animation, soundtrack, and themes. It really felt like the writers hit their stride in this season because characters were well developed and we could see them experiencing different emotions for their situations. As an example, we saw how Summer and Morty were acting out because of Beth and Jerry's divorce. It's tough on the entire family and puts things into perspective. One of my favorite things about this season was the continuity that it introduced. I love the way the season started with the Galactic Federation and the Citadel, and I also love the way evil Morty took over the Citadel. His villain arc was nicely set up and had me hyped for future seasons. In Season 3, we explored different alien planets, met new characters, saved the galaxy, destroyed heroes, and got an even clearer picture of how Rick negatively affects the family. There was a lot that happened, and I have surprisingly zero complaints about the season. If you've been keeping track of my scores, then you know as a whole, I gave Season 3 of Rick and Morty a 10 out of 10. It was consistently phenomenal, and I was beyond impressed by it. If you're a fan of adult animated comedies, I cannot recommend Rick and Morty enough, especially this season. Thank you for listening to my review of Rick and Morty Season 3. If you enjoyed the content and want to support the channel, then please leave a like and hit subscribe. If you did not enjoy the content, thank you for sticking around. I appreciate it. As always, I would love to read what you have to say, so let me know what you're thinking in the comments. Also, if there's something that you want to see reviewed, don't forget to let me know by leaving a comment and I will get to it slowly but surely. Lastly, if you want to see some more from me, you can check out my vlogs linked up above or my podcast, Good Friends. Again, thank you for watching. My name is Diego, and I will see you next time.